Thank you so much. Your presence is enriches our discussion, and we hope you will find the valuable of to this webinar, both your careers and private life. So in today's digital age, everyone has access to a camera one way or another at their fingertips. The art of photography has become a medium of expression. You can always communicate so much with photography. So whether you're a professional photographer or a simple fanatic, we believe there's something for everyone in this webinar. We are honored to have two distinguished speakers with us today. Our first speaker will be Annette Wachira, is from Kenya, team from Syngenta Foundation, Sustainable Agriculture. For those who are not familiar, at the foundation, we strive to promote sustainable agriculture practice and empower smallholder farmers around the world. And same, we also have David Williams, a representative from our partner organization, Syngenta, joining us. Syngenta is the leading science-based agri-tech company. And with that, we want to say both speakers are not only professional expertise, but also deep passion for photography. They will share their unique perspective and how photography and then tool to communicate the importance of sustainable agriculture and incredible stories behind it. So we also have myself as the moderator. My name is Harriet, and Mara from Syngenta Foundation as the host today. So thank you. And we hope throughout the webinar, we are going to inspire you, regardless of your background or levels of expertise, to explore the world of agriculture in photography. So our goal is for you to walk away with practical tips, techniques, and a fresh perspective that you can apply not only in your professional endeavors, but also in your personal photographies journeys. So once again, welcome to all our participants. We encourage you to actively engage, ask questions in the chat, and share your own experiences in our Q&A session, which will be led by Mara at the end of this call. So feel welcome, and I'll hand over to my co-host, Mara. Welcome once again.
Thank you, Nasha. So we can start the first presentation with Annette. If you can share your screen. I can meanwhile introduce her. Annette Wachira is a communications specialist who has a passion for photography and writing. Her background is in journalism and communications for development with a bias for projects. Annette currently supports the NICE project and Syngenta Foundation East Africa. So welcome, Annette, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mara, for that presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining the webinar today. And I hope that you can come out of this learning a couple of things on what photography is about. So when I was thinking about photography, I thought about growing up and seeing my dad taking photos of every occasion. I recall seeing him taking photos of my siblings, and we have these photo albums that show us as babies, right when you are graduating, up until weddings and even grandchildren. And so this is exactly what storytelling is all about. When you talk about photography, we talk about things such as how do we tell a story and piece all these images together. As I go deeper into my presentation, I'll be talking about what makes a good story, and also in this age of using phones, what exactly constitutes to a good story, and how do you take good photos using your mobile phone. So the first thing when it comes to getting a good story, first thing is you have to plan in advance. A lot of the times here at the foundation, we see that we have to go in line with the seasons of our crops. For example, if it's sorghum harvesting, we need to know when do we go to the field to make sure we have the best images. In addition, we also need to think about where is this going to be taking place? Will this be an indoor setup? Will this be an outdoor setup? Are we going to go in the field? Are we going to be in closed areas? All these things determine how we do our photography. So even as you think about going to get some stories for your agricultural stories, you need to know when is the right time to go. Sometimes recently we went to the field and it was actually raining and we were not able to take good photographs of the crops. And so it's important to know the timing of your crops and know when is the best season to be able to take the good photos. Photographs should always communicate without even saying many words. As you go through our presentation, you'll notice we have so many photos and very few words. If your photo doesn't articulate exactly what it needs to do, then you have not communicated. When it comes to photographs, you have to use different aspects to bring out the emotions. In the first photo, you can see there's an aspect of culture. If you look keenly, you can see the women are sitting on a stool, and all those things are enable us to find the emotions. In the second photo, you can see it's more or less what we call a backshot, and that ideally shows it has a sense of drama. And if you look into the composition of the photo, we have the clouds, we have trees here and there, we have rice that is growing, we have the farmer right in the middle of the farm. All these things come together to bring out the emotions. Some of the emotions can be happiness, inquisitiveness. We also want to know, is it a photo of sadness? Is it a photo of, does it bring any memories from your experiences in life? This is what our photo should do, should bring out the strong emotions. We also need to aim for a variety of shots. As you can see from this slide, all these are photos of sorghum, but if you look keenly, each photo is different from the other. We have photos which have wide shots. We have photos which are very close-ups on the actual sorghum. We have blurred photos. Blurring is a technique in photography where you blur either the front image or the back image of the image or the parts of the photo. And so you can see from this slide that all this variety of shots can be used in telling a story, and they all have different meanings. They also have different times to be used when you're doing a story. And so it's important when you go to the field, whether you have a photography or a camera, or you have a phone, you need to be able to take the different varieties so that your story can be a bit spiced up. You also need to learn how to caption your photos well. As you can see on the first photo, we've written women holding plants. That doesn't necessarily communicate anything. What we normally see in journalism, we have to use what we call the 5 W's and H to explain or give a sentence more clarity. That exactly means the who, the what, the where, the how, and the when, and also the why. If you look at the next photo, you can clearly see it answers the 5 W's and H. Who is in the photo? We have a farmer. Where are they? They're in Busia County in Kenya. What are they doing? They're showcasing African leafy vegetables in their farm. The why is what now the photo should exactly help us to understand. So why is this person in the middle of the farm? What is being grown in this farm? And that is what good captions help to tell a story. They give more clarity on what exactly the photo is about and help us to understand or even ask further questions on the photo. In the same line, we have to learn how to consider the composition of your photo. So what we call a photo story, especially in our terms where we work in institutions, here at the foundation, we have what we call the farmer hubs, and that is part of our agri-services team. So here we have our branded merchandise or our branded posters, which clearly showcase what we do at the foundation. So even as I take photos in the field, I have to take into consideration these key aspects. The subject has to be next to the branding, and the branding needs to correlate with what we're doing in the organization. It will be really weird if you put maybe another company here that is not part and parcel of what we do here at the foundation. So composition entails making sure the logos are visible, we have the proper brand colors, and that we also can see there's a bit of conversation going on and there's a bit of action. Sometimes we do take still photos in photography, but also when it comes to telling a story, we have to take a photo which can show conversation and can show that two people are together and they're conversing. Also, it's good to make sure you find the light. So the best times for taking photos, just from the top of my brain, is normally early in the morning or late in the evening. If you take a photo during the middle of the day, like the first photo was actually taken around noon to 1 p.m., just when the sun was very overhead. And what it does, it tends to blur the subjects. And sometimes with these photos, you can't even edit using the editing tools because of the nature of the camera and the nature of the light. So it's good to take into consideration where the sun is. Is it behind you? Is it in front of you? And how this affects your photos. So when it comes to, like we mentioned earlier, how you plan your shots, it's the same thing. You need to learn what the seasons are and the times of the day as well, because all this determine how well you tell your story using photography. Another key thing is ensuring is a sequence of your images while telling a story. I liked this slide because it can clearly show what we normally say farm to table. You can see that from the first photo, we have farmers in the field. Then we clearly can see what is being planted and how it's been done. A joke that we get from our teams is that the seeds team here normally uses rulers to be able to have very clear lines. And you can see the lines more or less are very straight. We then go to a photo of a man holding what has actually been planted. We can see at the farthest corner, we see now we are actually at the harvesting point and we are in the field. We have our team there with the potatoes, and you can see the crops that have produced the potatoes. And lastly, we have our favorite photo, which is a plate of chips, or what you call a plate of fries. And you can see how this story has moved from the beginning when we're in the field up until your KFC and your plate. And this is how you tell a story. This slide is very important because it's actually the epitome of our presentation. It shows from the beginning to the end, and that's how you should always think about your images. It's also good to focus on the details. The good thing nowadays with our phones, even with cameras, you can be able to zoom into the subject and you can clearly play around with the lighting. When you focus on details, you're able to have more compelling visuals. You're also able to showcase a different aspect of photography that is not really common. This helps especially as backgrounds, even as in other areas of your story. It can also be used in websites, and it's very, very polished, as you can see. Now we're going to go deeper into how do you take photography with a phone. The first thing is to always keep your phone steady. Hold the phone with both your hands and avoid shaking. I'll actually illustrate and say, this is basically how I normally take my photos. You put your elbows close to your body and then you embrace them with your chest. If you are seated, with your hips or with your waist. Also, a good trick that I like to do is just before I click on the button of taking the photo, I breathe out. If you're using a camera such as a Nikon or a Canon, sometimes if you take a photo when you're breathing, the image tends to shake. So it's really good for you to first breathe out, then take the shot. That way, your body is very still. We're also going to go deeper into what is the use of the rule of thirds. As you can see, every single time you look at a photo, your eyes always go to the top left of the photo. So this is how your eye scans across a photo. And so what you need to do when you're taking a photo is to make sure that your photo is in the yellow lines where the eye can easily move into. The good thing with our phones nowadays, we have this effect of putting the grids, and the grids help us to be able to know where to place our subjects. So if you're using a phone, I would advise you to go to your settings and see how you can get the grid effect on your photographs. It's also good to experiment with angles. We have different kind of angles. You have a bird's eye, we have a low angle, high angle, we have an eye level, worm's eyes, and even a head level. Some of these things you've also seen, we can also use drones to take overhead shots. But if you're using your phone, what you can do if you want to take let's say, for example, a bird's eye is to be a bit higher than your subject. If you can see from the first photo, clearly the phone is above the head of the subject. The second photo is a good example of an eye level, but this must have been when somebody, maybe you've squatted down or you're knelt down so that you can be able to be face to face with your subject. So all these angles can come in handy as you think about how do you take photos for your stories. I know when you're in the field, sometimes it's really hard to think about all these things, but the good thing about photography, it's like riding a bicycle. The more you do it, the more you become good at it. Another key thing is using natural light. I know we have the tendency to think that when you use the flash on your phone, it's going to get better photos, but that's not true. So if you can be able to target the best time for your photography, like I mentioned, early morning or late afternoon, you can leverage on what you call is the golden hour. And at that time, the sun is very low, it's not bright, there are a bit of clouds here and there. You're able to take better shots that are more organic, more reflective, and they have stronger visual aspects. We also need to know how to edit your photos. Nowadays, we have all these tools. These are a couple of them that I've used personally. Adobe Photoshop Express is really good for editing your mobile phone, your mobile photos. It's very easy to use. You can also do tutorials. You can go on YouTube and learn how do I make my photos a bit much better. And even cameras have inbuilt, nowadays they have inbuilt filters or inbuilt settings which can help your photos to come out really well. Some things like reducing the light or just increasing the light can really make a big difference in your photo. So it's really good for you to make sure you edit your photos and just present the best that you can present to your story. In a nutshell, as we finish up, let's not forget to always ensure you have consent for your photos. A lot of the times they see that we go to the field, we have these amazing photos, but we cannot use them because we don't have consent. The thing about consent is that we are working on a very thin line between being sued by people or organizations. And so it's very important for us to ensure that you make sure you have model release forms. Here we have an example of what Syngenta uses, and we have a customized one in the foundation as well. But also it's good to make sure if you're in a group setting, always ask the team, can I take photos? Always ask permission and mention that, you know, this photo will be used in this particular story or in this particular forum. Always articulate to the team and to the subjects that you'll be using their photos and help them to understand where exactly they're going to be going towards. And so this is very important. It's a very crucial point. So as we finish up, remember, your story is just as good as your photo. So always think about why you're taking the photos, which is the purpose, the different camera angles, the lighting, the people imagery, and the crops in focus. We have a link here which can take you to more skills on how to take photos with your phone, because there's so many things to do in photography, but today we focused on how can we best equip you with what you have in your day-to-day agricultural work. So that is it from me. I hope you've learned a thing or two, and we're open to any questions. I'll take it back to Mara to continue with the presentation. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Annette. I'm sure we were all learned something, not more than one or two. We learned a lot. We have a couple of questions. There is one from Linda saying, how do you handle consent for group photos?
Okay, thank you, Linda, for the question. When it comes to the group photos, what I like to do is, depending on the setup, you need to keep announcing that you're going to be taking photos and you're going to be using them. So if there's a moderator or there is a team lead who's in their presence, they can announce in the beginning of the meeting, in the middle, and also at the end. You can also just keep mentioning during the meetings that, as you can see, we have a camera person here and these photos are going to be used either in our website or in a story. So always remind the audience that we're going to be using their photos. I hope that has answered your question.
We have another question from Timothy. How can we also take that consent draft to for our local use?
Yes, I believe it can be localized. What I showcased was what is from David as well and from Syngenta, the organization. But at the foundation, we also have it. You can also just make it according to your organization and see how best it can serve your projects. So yes, it can be customized.
It has to suit local legal requirements as well, for example. So Kenya, for example, has recently had a lot of new work done on data protection, slightly different requirements to some other countries. But we've supplied it to you or your country directors in the past, happy to send it again. And Syngenta does an update from time to time, and we tend to rely on that one. The question, I suppose, is what do you do with a consent form in English, David and Annette, so someone who doesn't speak English and who may not be able to read their own language? And that, of course, in smallholder agriculture is a recurring issue.
Someone need my consent to take photos of my crop at the farm, especially when they visit in my absence.
That's a very good question. I mean, yes, because I'll give a good example, Dan. If maybe somebody comes to your farm and you have really good crop of, let's say, sorghum, and then next thing you know, you have that photo maybe in a Nat Geo advert, they've actually commercialized your photo. So the thing about consent is people still don't know how to ask or when to ask it, and it's still work in progress. But I would say that it's good to ask for permission. Yeah, I think as simple as that. Maybe David or Paul maybe might have more information on that as well.
Use the opportunity to see if my sound is working any better. Is it?
It is. Welcome back.
But yes, no, absolutely, Annette. You must ensure that the owner of the property is, of course, informed and gives his consent for photos to be taken of his location. Absolutely, private property. But in the instance of public spaces, no, there is no requirement.
I think a topic that does come up from time to time is taking photography in marketplaces. So at the sale end of food, and I found it useful there sometimes in the past to get my local colleagues to ask the old lady whose tomatoes and cucumbers it is on the stand to do the establishing of the relationship, and certainly before I take any photographs, because I've also been chased away in the past once or twice by old grannies who didn't want me taking photographs of their produce. So our local colleagues speaking to the market ladies in the language of their hearts, I think, is, to my mind, more valuable than any English consent form could ever be, and avoids trouble.
So David Williams brings 20 years of experience at Syngenta and Syngenta Group. He has worked across the communication function. His main area of expertise is brand, for which he now manages the corporate identity and brand governance for Syngenta Group and the Syngenta Crop Protection and Seeds Business Unit. So thank you, David, for joining us. And
thank you very much.
Yours.
Okay, so thanks very much, everyone, for having me join today. Photography is very close to my heart. In the 20 years I've been at Syngenta, we often mulling over the difference between one or two shots and what are the differences and the aesthetics that are more appealing to one versus the other. I obviously come from the perspective of Syngenta and that of Syngenta Group, a leading ag tech industry player. And so I have tried to look at some photography, obviously, that's more related to smallholder photography. But in many of the slides, you'll be looking at how we best reflect the ag tech industry and that of agriculture and technology in agriculture. And make sure I go to the next slide. So, everyone knows this sentence, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And it's very difficult to actually try and, particularly within the context of agriculture, to find sometimes imagery that that brings together all the core elements that are happening in modern agriculture today. You've either just got a tractor, or you've got a farmer, or you've got a field, but to bring all those different quality practices and applications of technology is very difficult. And now I've got a picture here which we've recently done for Syngenta Group, which is around regenerative agriculture, where we're now embracing the traditions of agriculture, of old and current now agricultural practices. And we developed this with an agency, and of course it's not a photo. It's been made to be as realistic as possible, and we're trying to show many elements regarding regenerative agriculture, and it is a challenge. What this image is ultimately showing, of course, is the whole farm and the knife and fork, and the fact that agriculture is sustaining food security for a growing population. But it also shows many other elements that you can learn more about. And here I've just quickly popped them up so you can see the amount of different things going on in this picture, from the water source for cattle, having intercropping happening between alfalfa and soybean. You've even got field margins and pollinator strips, and these are some of the elements here that are representing modern agriculture today. So it's if you see this on LinkedIn or other, don't hesitate to please like or share. So, as I said, looking at it predominantly through the lens of modern ag tech, I've got some sort of do's and don'ts, if you would like, with regard to agricultural photography, and starting off mostly with the do nots. And I think this is one of the most common scenarios that I see today. We're trying to show, companies such as ourselves as being closer to our customers and consumers, closer to growers, but in doing so, many of the agencies that we work with who don't have the same level of understanding often depict it in different ways. And what I'm trying to showcase here is that we're not a homegrown, harvesting multiple different produce in one area that can fit in a nice basket. We're certainly not either organic farming. Yeah, I mean, obviously we're pulling into biologicals now, and we'll start to see more of that going forward. But we're certainly not also a representative of people holding, water cans in this instance. This is very much in small scale farming or homegrown farming as well. But what we are is on the right hand side, high tech farming, where you can see tomatoes being fed with drip irrigation, pinned at about 3 meters high, with someone wearing appropriate clothing and handling the tomatoes appropriately. So try to make that distinction, and really focus on the correct representation of ag tech. Other images that generally, and this is more of a general thing, this is sort of principles that I go by on a day-to-day basis, is trying to really keep the authenticity of photos, trying to avoid that over manipulated imagery like some of our competition might do. Overused conventions, people holding or cusping soil or or crops, are very overused. Over dramatization as well, a little bit in the sunrise and sunsets as well, trying to capture something that's overly dynamic, which takes focus away from what's really happening in the field. For all that these are real environments, they detract from the essence of what the photo is trying to say. You get caught in the drama of the photo. Obviously, images that lack focus or context are to be avoided. Metaphorical imagery is, I couldn't find one ideally of agriculture, but things that are more used for maybe people development or in HR to represent leadership or other things like that, it might be useful. but in the instance of ag, generally we avoid. Pixelated imagery, of course, there are ways now with artificial intelligence to enhance those. If you've got a great photo that you really need, you can improve the pixels. And then lastly, fake compositions. I see this more and more as we struggle to keep up to date with showing the best face of modern agriculture, and people often pull out, as you can see here, fake, a cutout of a person holding an iPad, and even a cutout of a robot doing some fake spraying. None of those elements are true to the reality of that picture. And then there's things that we really must try to avoid, that must be avoided. And as you know, today, intensive farming, it can have benefits when you think about working with small parcels of land versus large. There's a lot of efficiencies here in intensive farming, but generally speaking, it's quite worrying about the impact that has. So we try to avoid that. Monoculture, I mean, we've got, particularly if you think about Brazil or America, you've got enormous farms, hundreds of thousands of hectares, and to show this monoculture is something that's not resonating well. And I'll show examples to all of these on alternatives. Of course, bad product storage. It's critical that these be stored at the correct temperature in a locked room, and this type of mess is not welcome. And again, small things that you might not be aware of, mishandling coated seeds. Coated seeds have crop protection product on them. They should be handled with care. Now, seasonal crop burning as well. These are sort of older practices that are contributing to CO2 emissions that we're trying to avoid as well. And drift spray, in many instances, you might actually perceive it to be dust or other things, but no, this is through spraying. You've got a little bit too much wind happening at the time, and spraying should not have taken place at that particular time with strong winds. Avoid that type of shot. And then more, this is probably the most common one I see on a daily basis: unprotected people spraying, not using PPE, protective clothing. There's no mask, there's no goggles, there's no gloves on this gentleman here in this. I think it's it looks like rice, actually, I think. And then, of course, unsafe product handling. Yes, the person's got gloves, but got bare, arms that are visible. These are things that we try to really avoid. So what are alternatives to those? Compared to the intensive farming, we've now got intercropping, growing, crops within crops, where either as a cover crop to prevent the need for weed, that helps reduce the growth of weeds, or as a secondary harvest. I think in this case you've got mustard being grown in between corn. Multifunctional landscapes. Now, this is a really important one. This is where you show a diversity of different crops growing side by side, a little bit of forestry or bushes or even field margins that promote pollinators in the environment. That's a really important one to remember. Obviously, good storage speaks for itself, and the handling of coated seeds too. But again, back into a little bit like intercropping, these are traditional methods that have been applied before but are starting to come back in more strongly, and things like low or no till are really key to show that we're our best contribution to the environment. And precision application, this is a clear spray here. We don't have it drifting off into the distance. It's being applied where it needs to be applied. And then protective clothing, and of course handling products effectively. So really be careful about which photos you're using to not, poorly communicate the business or the industry that we're in. Other things that are actually really good to show. I mean, this is some of the realities of agriculture today. We must not shy away from the challenges that growers face on a daily basis, or that the planet is facing as a result of the requirement for more and more agriculture to feed the world. Pests, disease, weeds. I mean, to show weeds in a commercial advert for one of our products is obviously not going to work. But in the context of talking about grower challenges, this is perfect. Obviously, old practices as well is not something that as an ag tech industry we highly promote, but these are the challenges that are being faced today across the world, especially in some of the more developing countries. Drought, floods, deforestation, wildfires. These are becoming more and more common as we see greater impacts of climate change. Don't shy away from setting the context of how important dealing with these challenges is. Now, tech in agriculture. I'm starting off here with a photo that I've used many times. I have to say, it's a beautiful photo. It's great composition, and a clear focus there on an iPad being used. I believe it is actually in a greenhouse. Now, that's not actually true to reality, but it seems to be the default image that we all jump to when we think about technology in agriculture. And what I'd like to show is that there's a whole plethora of other ways of understanding what technology is in agriculture. And here are some of the good ones that I've got. Modern machinery, those high-tech tractors, planters, for example, on the bottom left. There's digital tools that are helping us today to better manage and forecast the weather or the heat stress or drought stress that are happening on fields. Digital apps now, particularly through Syngenta's CropWise solution or MAP solutions, are offering farmers more and more tools to get their to harvest at the right time, and maximize their yields and return on investment. Obviously, drones are still really big part now of our agricultural solutions, enabling a lot of what you're seeing on the middle there. And of course, robotics now, big part starting to play. And here you see one of our latest tomato vision robots in action, harvesting, and it actually sucks in the ripe tomatoes. But a few other ideas as well. Irrigation. Modern irrigation. Here at top left, you see central pivot irrigation. Bottom left, another modern form of irrigation. They're used alongside some of our biggest agricultural inputs, and are a clear sign of developed agriculture. Modern farms, generally speaking, here's storage and here's some great silos. They clearly convey a high-tech farm. And then, of course, we're starting to see more and more, we've got more and more involvement of digital going into agriculture today. And it's quite difficult to bring that to life, other through an iPad or phone, as I was showing before. So actually, some of these overlaid images are helping to get across a broader message around technology in ag. So I don't shy away from these, although they're not as authentic as I usually like. And then, of course, vertical farming. So something Syngenta is not currently committed to, but is reflective of modern practices. Now, people is one of the toughest things to get right when you're out on a photo shoot, particularly if they're talking, interacting with others. You'll often get very strange expressions coming through on their face. And one of the rules of thumbs that I tend to stick by and would highly recommend is to avoid, and it all depends on the context of what you're trying to show, of course, but the overly serious or shy or sad farmer is not engaging or attractive. And they were some of the words that were coming across in our sound word cloud earlier on. The beauty of a photo is really important, and that's lost through these overly serious. So this middle gap of focused growers inspecting their crop, a level of intensity in their gaze on their produce is good. And then of course happy, smiling farmers is always welcome. Now laughing, I haven't put it as a no, because that top right image is a fantastic image. You can't deny the authenticity that's coming through. But in the bottom right, the gentleman on the left-hand side who's laughing there is discrediting, I think, the photo to some degree. And so when you've got photo shoots and you do have people who are a little bit shy in front of the camera, you need to get them to relax, to focus in and create more of that intensity in what on the farm. It's a better representation of the hard work they do. The other thing, and related to that, is this example. Many a time I have to choose between 2 or 3 photos, and I can't say that either of these are perfect. And the one on the right, the gentleman doesn't look particularly happy. I mean, this is what you have to work with. But what I see on the left-hand side is that the gentleman on the right of that left-hand side picture is not looking at the gentleman on his left. He's staring into the distance, and it creates an awkward, non-engaged, feeling, right? It doesn't look that they're connecting together. Whereas for all that he does look a bit more sad on the right-hand side, there's clearly dialogue, there's clearly an interaction going on there that is important. So watch out for people staring into the distance while someone's talking to them. Now, obviously, these are just a good mix of different photos of people in agriculture, showing the diversity, the culture, and the different geographies across the world. And, there we have, trainings happening or engagements amongst people. You can see that they're all staring at the same thing and have that air of concentration. People, a couple together, a partnership happening where you might have a Syngenta representative connecting with a farmer. That shows our contribution to ag. And of course, those stunning photos top right there of a rice grower, and I think it's an Indian lady top right there. And then I've included also a photo of a family. Now, obviously, child labor is not something that we want to be seeing, and I'll touch more on that in a second. But I think the impression here is that you've got the farmer supporting his family through what he does, and actually, it's a really powerful image. I wouldn't shy away from either. And here's a few other concepts as well. Growers don't always have to be seen face on. The fact that you've got the Wellington boots or hands touching the soil, or cupping the rice, I think are very strong examples of other shots that you can get to best reflect growers' interactions on their farm. Now, what I see a lot of is this, particularly on the top row here. A gentleman in a suit and tie on a field. That I don't think I've ever seen that in reality. That this is a staged photo shoot, so really avoid that. Farmers that are too distant and the whole image is slightly blurry in the foreground. Again, what value is that really adding? I tend to steer away from those. Looking out of the frame as well. If his head was to the left-hand side of the picture, looking inwards, that works much better. But looking outside of the frame is something I always try to avoid. And of course, staged and unrealistic. Having, these people dressed in lab coats out on a field is something you wouldn't ever really see. And I actually wonder if that's a real photo or if they've been photoshopped into that field. There seems to be an issue with some of the lighting and shadows. And as I said before, seeing children at work on a farm is certainly not something that we need to be, that is unfortunately a reality, but not something that we should be portraying at all. Now back to camera, you can argue he's thinking and looking out over his field. There are advantages to that depending on what your content is about. That pensive, farmer struggling or having to contemplate the future of his farm. But in many instances, it's a less engaging shot than having the farmer direct to camera or front to camera. So here, obviously, with a number of you on the call today, I wanted to have a little view of great smallholder photography. And here we see, growers intensively at work, reflecting their cultural environment. You clearly get great context on what's going on. And in both instances, they're harvesting here. I don't think that's harvesting of rice and wheat on the top. And then growers inspecting their crops. You see again that the air of gaze where they're all focused on. You don't have one person looking away. And then the same goes with farmer trainings. That's a key part of both the foundation's work and that of Syngenta, engaging with growers and training them up to get the best and the most out of their land. And then diversity here, diversity of people, cultures. I mean, we've seen that in a lot of the slides that just came forward. But really, I think the main message I want to get across here is that particularly to represent, modern agriculture and to engage society with the future power, or, with the importance of agriculture, having youthful people is really important. Having the traditional old white male that is perceived in many countries as the grower is not reflective of the industry as a whole, right? Particularly in Southeast Asia, women often dominate on the field, and that's the main message I want to get here. Women in agriculture is really important to convey, and the youth as well is top of importance. Okay, now we're going to a little bit into the crops, and again, I know it's quite a lot of pretty things here, and as Annette had touched on before, really think about the up close and far away and the interdivisions between those two poles, if you'd like. Really do maximize. Now, I did talk about monocropping. This is, of course, Brazil being reflected. That's going to be the nature. It would be better if that bottom right photo had some trees in the distance to show a little bit of forestry and break up that feeling of monoculture stretching for miles and miles. Obviously, I have all of these photos have been sourced from our repositories that we have, but I think what's really important here, specifically for growers, is to really show the best aesthetic and attractive quality of crops, whether it's in the field or from the harvest. That's what growers like to see. And that leads me on to this next, the next slide after this, about feedback from growers. But just before we do, I wanted to also show that what I've been going on a little bit about already, trying to avoid that feeling of pure monoculture everywhere, showing the diversity and richness and beauty of what agriculture can offer. And you can see here, trying to keep crops in the ground year round. You've got crop rotation happening with multiple crops. You've got forestry and land to show that benefit pollinators and biodiversity. We've got a great shot there from Kenya, top right actually, showing smaller parcels of land and how farmers are managing. And of course, I couldn't get away from trying to show one of our branded, our Syngenta Group logo that's been planted with cabbages in the Syngenta Group words next to Zurich Airport in Switzerland. So if you're ever flying across, don't hesitate to take a photo and send it across for us. And I was really privileged the other day to get some feedback from some growers. This doesn't happen all too often on particular campaigns that we were doing. So a shout out to Nicole Glor from our marketing team in Syngenta, who offered some nice insights from growers looking at different ads. And I've got two slides here. And I think what's interesting is, to the untrained eye, you would actually say these are really successful images. But looking at through the lens of the grower, they home in on things that we might not see at first hand, i.e. the wearing of nail polish, which isn't a true representation of a female grower on a farm. She would definitely chip those nails more than once, I can promise you that. But what they do like is to see the diversity and that mix and gender and ages. So again, women here and youthful women in this case. Some farmers can't relate to certain methods, so choosing the right representation for the right geography, for the right market is key. And in this instance, as you see, they actually don't look particularly attractive or fertile in the closer part of the photo, so be wary of that. And another bit of feedback that we got was that far away and artistic images lack relevance. It's really difficult to make out what it is, and actually to assess the quality of the crop. Hence, some of those earlier pictures really get the crops in focus when you're trying to explain things to growers. And it's missing the human element, which I think was a really nice build as well. This one's a bit questionable to some degree in that, they didn't like the fact there was mountains in the background. It just felt less relevant to the lowland areas that those growers. So be conscious again of what best suits which geography. And of course, this is talking about fewer sprays in the wording, but actually it's a shaker instead of a sprayer. So really get the right equipment. And lastly, I think this is kind of winding down. I know I've been going on for a little while, but I wanted to show a couple of tips and tricks on using pictures with PowerPoint. It's one of the most common mediums that are used for presentations, of course. And here are some of the learnings that I've got. I pulled 2 images here off our Trinity, one of our portals at Syngenta, and this is very typical. You've taken it in a low light condition, and it comes out a little bit dreary, a little bit lacking some sort of vibrancy, and very easily using the picture format tab. So if you just double click on your picture, you'll then bring up the picture format tab, and in corrections you can just use the different options of slightly increased brightness or contrast. And you see I might have gone a little bit too far on the right hand side, but it's certainly way better in the middle than what we see on the left hand side. And the most common trick with particularly a presentation like this, I haven't yet compressed it. I suspect this deck could be in the region of 150 to 200 megabytes, and each picture coming in at not far between 4 to 8 megabytes. You can use this trick here to compress pictures. And so if you look at the picture format icon, depending on your PC, it could just be this icon, or it could say compress pictures. And you literally bring up this pop-up and untick the apply only to this picture if you want to reduce the whole deck. And then my recommendation, print seems to happen less and less. And web is perfectly sufficient, even for really high definition screens being used at events. Although, if you're going to go on a screen that is 12 meters wide or more, you might want to use the print setting and share a very high resolution file, very weighty file. But this, generally speaking, if I save my deck now, I'll get all the way down from 200 megabytes to potentially an emailable size of somewhere around 10 to 15 megabytes. Okay, just AI. Be careful using AI. I put these searches in, and you can see here coffee beans being harvested. They're not realistic. They're dried coffee beans that you'd find at the end of the process. You'd normally see berries. You've got the gentleman's eyes not looking great and a very oblong shaped corn. So be careful, embrace it. This is the website I used. And then if you want, I won't go into you can read the rights. I'll send this out later, so I won't go into it now. But the last thing is you know, for Syngenta, we've got Trinity platforms to be able to get things. You've got cheaper stock photography from Shutterstock and iStock. Getty Images, really good for commercial imagery and owning the full rights. And please don't use Google. We don't own the rights there. And if you ever want to search for a photo to find it, you've got a photo, but you don't know where it came from, use this. Upload it to Google Images and it will find it for you. Thank you.